Uh, my job this morning is to introduce our panelists and one of our keynote speakers this morning, Deb Haaland. And I don't have a list. Let me see, is Deb on?
Yep.
Do you know how many? Okay, so Deb Haaland is on. So let me just say a quick word about Deb. What we're going to do is, so Deb's going to give a speech. I don't know how long it'll take, maybe 20 minutes or so, and then we'll have an opportunity for some questions and answers, or I'll ask her some questions. And then we're going to go into a great panel. And that panel is going to include Leticia Gutierrez Lorandi, who's the General Director of Policy and Coordination for the Ministry of Environment in Mexico City, Mexico. Think about the size of Mexico City in comparison to Denver. I mean, it's going to be interesting to hear what she has to tell us about this subject. And then Allegra Happy Haynes, some 30 years, who is the leader for Parks and Recreation for Denver and has done so much for the city. And then Sadhu Johnston, the city manager of Vancouver, British Columbia, up in the Cascades and creating the wonders of that city there in British Columbia. So we'll have a panel. Each of them will give a 7-minute presentation, and then we'll have an opportunity for moderated questions. But at this point, it's my honor to introduce Deb Haaland. I do have a bio for her, which I think I can probably forego because let me just tell you what I know about her. Congressman Haaland, I think it was back in 2017, gave me a call and said, Mr. Secretary, I want to run for Congress in the congressional district that encompasses Albuquerque, New Mexico. And we had a conversation about the reality that at that point in time, I think there was 1 Native American in the U.S. House of Representatives, 0 in the United States Senate. And I said to her, you will be a great member of the House of Representatives, a voice for your district, which is basically Albuquerque and a few other parts of New Mexico. But also, you will be able to bring your perspective in terms of tribal nations and the great role that they play in our country. You have some 570 plus tribal nations across the country. We have Alaska Natives, and they are very much, they are the first Americans here long before all of us were here. You know, I sometimes used to make in my statements the personal biographical description that my family had been here for some 12 generations in what is now the United States. Well, when you look at Deb's biography, I think she is like 37th generation or something like that. But she is an incredible leader and immediately has become one of the leaders in the House of Representatives. And these days of a government which sometimes is polarized and dysfunctional, one of the things that Deb does is she brings her best every day to try to create solutions to the challenges that we face in this country, and challenges especially on the environment. So with that, can I do this, Dominic? Tell everybody to unmute themselves. Can everybody unmute themselves? You know, sometimes these Zoom calls are too like antiseptic, right? Everybody unmute yourself. Joyce, President McConnell, Patrick.
I'm happy to unmute myself.
Can everybody unmute themselves? Okay. So let's give Congresswoman Deb Haaland a great round of applause for her leadership. First Native Americans in Congress. Deb. Right. Deb.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Secretary. What a fabulous introduction. Thank you so much for your amazing service to the people of Colorado and to our country, and for your leadership on so many issues for our environment, your dedication to our environment, to our renewable energy economy, for your leadership on protecting our public lands. I strive to follow in your footsteps, and I am so grateful for everything that you do and continuing the conversations, the important conversations that we absolutely need to be having right now with all that is happening to our environment. Also, thank you so much, Happy Haynes, for extending the invitation to speak and for testifying before my subcommittee earlier this year about the Outdoors for All Act. And I thank everyone who's watching and listening today for your interest in protecting our planet. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a 35th generation New Mexican. That was close, Mr. Secretary. And one of the first 2 Native American women elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. As a Pueblo woman, I was raised to feel connected to the earth and to carry on the legacy of environmental stewardship of countless generations who came before me, who took seriously their responsibility to pass our natural treasures on to future generations. I learned from my parents and my grandparents to revere nature, and throughout my life, I have worked to protect our open spaces, our air, and our water. Before I came to Congress, I was an activist and an organizer. I went to Standing Rock to protect the Sioux tribe's water and land from the Dakota Access Pipeline, and I stood with the Gwich'in in opposition to drilling for oil and gas in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. I've supported other communities of color and low-income communities that are most impacted by environmental harms, like Flint, Michigan, the White Earth Reservation of Minnesota, and Albuquerque's South Valley in my own congressional district, and work to make sure everyone's voices are heard on these issues. I feel it's my responsibility to protect these vulnerable communities and places while I'm in Congress, as well as the wildlife that doesn't have a voice. It's one of the reasons I sought a seat on the House Natural Resources Committee and why I was so pleased when Chairman Raul Grijalva asked me to serve as vice chair. And then when I saw the opportunity, I threw my hat into the ring to serve as chairwoman of the Subcommittee on National Parks, Forests, and Public Lands. And I'm so grateful that my colleagues on the committee put their trust in me. During my time as chair, we've had some successes. We enacted a lands package that designated over 1 million acres of wilderness and a bill to address the maintenance backlog on our public lands. We passed bills through the House to designate new wilderness areas in Colorado, Washington State, and in California. And we passed legislation that I co-led to make permanent the 10-mile buffer zone around Chaco Culture National Historic Park in New Mexico to protect Chaco Canyon, my ancestral homeland, from oil and gas drilling. And of great interest to many of you, we also permanently authorized the Land and Water Conservation Fund and guaranteed full funding. From the day I became subcommittee chair, I heard about that nonstop from advocates about the need to do that for LWCF. Making LWCF permanent and guaranteeing funding will help to create parks in urban areas where too many people currently don't have access to any green spaces at all. And it will provide recreational opportunities for underserved and low-income communities. I'm also trying to improve access to protected natural places by improving the process to get a recreational permit through my Simplifying Outdoor Access for Recreation Act. That's the SOAR Act, which will make it simpler and quicker for outfitters, educational organizations, and community groups to obtain recreational permits from federal agencies. My work on that bill led us to wonder how well the recreational permitting process is working for traditionally underserved communities. So soon I'm going to introduce a bill to direct the federal agencies that issue recreational permits to report on this and make recommendations for ways the system can be improved to make it work better for those groups. As we've seen over the last several months, having access to the outdoors is vital to maintaining our mental and physical well-being. I know this is a focus of the work many of you do, and I believe that the steps we have taken on LWCF and which we're trying to take with all these other bills will have a positive impact on human health. LWCF is also important for building resiliency in the face of climate change, which was the central issue in my campaign when I first ran for Congress, because it is the greatest threat that our planet faces. We've heard testimony in my subcommittee that protecting unaltered ecosystems is important for ensuring species can adapt to climate change, and that the protection of critical ecosystems will be essential to preserving the ecosystem services that human beings rely on. By providing permanent full funding for LWCF, we have ensured that the fund can continue to protect headwaters, riparian areas, refugia, and other important habitats that safeguard adaptation opportunities for non-human species and human communities. We're also working to reverse the tide of habitat loss and fragmentation for America's fish, wildlife, and plant species by considering bills such as the Wildlife Corridors Conservation Act, which would create a comprehensive corridor network nationwide to reduce public and wildlife conflict. As human development encroaches on wildlife habitat, it is essential that we give those animals a way to move naturally through urban and suburban areas so that they don't harm people or get harmed themselves. I've also introduced my own legislation to boost climate resilience by protecting our natural areas. The 30 by 30 resolution to save nature, which I partnered with my fellow New Mexico Senator Tom Udall on, sets a goal of preserving 30% of the land in the United States by 2030. And I've been working with international partners on a global 30 by 30 effort. By setting this goal, we can protect vital habitat for species that are seeking refuge from climate change and promote natural carbon sequestration. We can do this in an inclusive way that involves local, state, and tribal governments and private landowners, creates economic opportunities for farmers, ranchers, fishermen, and foresters, and expands access to natural places for underrepresented groups. I'm working on other natural solutions to support climate adaptation and resilience also. With Senator Cory Booker, I introduced the Climate Stewardship Act. Our bill supports reforestation, climate-friendly farming practices that restore healthy soils and wetlands restoration and protection. These measures will take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere for the long term, and they will help boost climate adaptation and resilience. Many of our cities lie along the coast or along waterways, so they're vulnerable to sea level rise or flooding from extreme weather events due to climate change. Wetland restoration will reduce coastal flooding, and climate-friendly farming will reduce soil and chemical runoff that has played a large part in degrading the health of our coastal areas. And our focus on reforestation in the bill is specifically tailored to benefit urban areas. We set an explicit goal of planting over 100 million trees in urban areas by 2030. And to get the work done, we create a stewardship corps to provide youth from low-income communities, indigenous communities, and communities of color with the academic, vocational, and social skills necessary to pursue long-term productive careers in the forest sector and the wetland restoration sector. Sometimes it might seem like the coronavirus pandemic has pushed the climate crisis and the nature crisis out of the spotlight, but I think it has shown a spotlight on the problems we face and the inequities in our world. There's a nexus between the climate and nature crises and the jump of an animal disease to humans. The loss of habitat and the stress of higher temperatures are pushing the conflicts between humanity and the natural world to levels we have never seen before. The legacy of environmental racism and injustice that has left some people far more susceptible to the ravages of COVID-19 than any others has been laid bare for all of us to see. In New Mexico, Native Americans make up less than 11% of the population, but at one point were more than half of the coronavirus cases. Black, Hispanic, and Native Americans make up a disproportionate share of the COVID-19 hospitalizations and deaths across the United States. And we ask, why is that? Well, it's because years of exposure to radiation from uranium mining and nuclear weapons testing, methane leakage from oil and gas drilling, and industrial chemicals from factories in their neighborhoods have caused underlying health conditions that make them more vulnerable, coupled with lack of access to clean water that makes this disease more dangerous. And now climate-linked fires and hurricanes are just making our problems even worse. One thing this pandemic has shown us is how much human behavior impacts our environment. The unprecedented steps the world has taken to show the spread of the virus have dramatically reduced the number of cars on the road, flights in the air, and factories that are running. While these actions have put a strain on the economy, they have also dropped atmospheric nitrogen dioxide levels. And as we have seen, once hazy skylines are clear and wildlife are reclaiming habitats. This must be a turning point. We must listen to our planet and act now. That's why I put forward a plan to ensure that our efforts to recover from the pandemic and its economic impacts address our climate crisis and racial and environmental injustice. Last week, Senator Ed Markey and I unveiled our agenda to transform, heal, and renew by investing in a vibrant economy to thrive. This broad-reaching framework aims to address the intertwined crises of mass unemployment, the pandemic, racial and economic injustice, and climate change. Our Thrive agenda outlines a plan to invest in frontline communities, to counteract racial and gender injustice, and it prioritizes those who have borne the brunt of past pollution and this COVID-19 pandemic. It also invests in climate resilience by putting people to work, upgrading our broken infrastructure to expand access to clean and affordable energy, transportation, and water, as well as protecting and restoring wetlands, forests, and public lands, and cleaning up pollution in our communities. It also creates opportunities for family farmers by investing in food systems that support healthy soil and climate resilience. Yesterday, I joined with Senator Cory Booker in introducing the Environmental Justice Legacy Pollution Cleanup Act, which would provide $100 billion to clean up legacy pollution in communities of color, indigenous communities, and low-income communities that have been disproportionately harmed over the years. Our bill would also prohibit new permits for major sources of air pollution in communities that are already suffering. This aligns with another bill I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of, the Environmental Justice for All Act, introduced by my friend, Representative Don McEachin, and Natural Resources Committee Chairman Raul Grijalva. They have also worked closely with the environmental justice communities to propose a comprehensive approach to protecting communities from the cumulative impact of pollution and give those communities a greater voice in the decisions that will move their communities forward. We've clearly still have a tremendous amount of work to do on these issues, but we're proposing solutions and trying to move them forward. As you're all probably aware, the Trump administration has generally not been an ally on these issues. During the pandemic, they have sought to suspend enforcement of environmental laws and have circumvented public input and tribal consultation on oil and gas development on public lands. Hopefully, the political atmosphere will change soon and the path forward will be easier, but things are likely to get worse before they get better. Powerful special interests have the ear of this administration, and in fact, many of the people who work in this administration previously worked for those industries. They know what they want to do, to exploit as much of our natural resources as they can, and they know they don't have much time left. So they're running roughshod over environmental protections. Our planet can't survive that, and our vulnerable communities cannot survive that. We need to continue making it clear that the changing climate is impacting the planet and the lives of everyone around the world. The status quo was never good for many of our communities, but it is even worse now. We need to make clear that it's staying the course isn't working and showing how much support there is out there for us to change direction. At this pivotal point in history, the collision of the many crises we face calls for big, bold action and dramatic changes, and we must rise to that challenge. We have one Earth. We need to take care of it while we still can, because our lives depend on it. Thank you so much again for having me here today and for being part of the fight to save our planet and everything who lives here. And I look forward to some questions.
Thank you very much, Congressman Deb Haaland. So you have lots of comments coming in through the chat room, and obviously we'll open it up for questions. We have about 10 minutes. I I will say that a lot of the comments are just a great appreciation for you and the great work that you have done in your time in the U.S. House of Representatives. There's a specific question on the Badger 2 Medicine Vote Protection Act, which is a request of the Blackfeet Nation, which I know Senator John Tester has introduced in the House. And the question really is, how do we become more inclusive in terms of land action? There's a question on the plan under the new America's Great Outdoors Act to plant 1 million trees. What do you think of that? And somebody snuck in a question via text to me about whether you are interested in being Secretary of the Interior at some point after you finish your service in the House of Representatives.
I may never finish my service in the House of Representatives. I feel like there's always something to do here, right? But look, one thing, you know, I like to start with the Montana piece. Thoughts on how we might continue to move toward a more inclusive model of land protection? I think that is about education. You know, one thing that people often don't stop to think about is that when all the boundaries were drawn for tribal lands, tribes weren't at the table for those things, right? They didn't ask tribes to come and where do you want your boundaries? They just drew them and, you know, put people on there, their reservations, pueblos, nations. I think education is absolutely in order to make sure that people understand where traditional lands are. With respect to the Standing Rock, you know, Dakota Access Pipeline protests, they were protecting their sacred lake. It wasn't within their exterior boundaries, but it's their sacred lake, and they have an obligation to protect that lake, historically and traditionally. So I feel like we just need to make sure that tribal leaders and tribes have a seat at the table every single time, that they can educate the country and the world on why their voice is important. So that's what I would say to that. Planting all those trees. I know it sounds like a lot, but I think we can, you know, we'll just have to start somewhere. When we talked about, you know, trees in urban areas, I mean, it breaks my heart that there's so many kids in this country who don't have a chance to, you know, wade through an icy cold stream with their sneakers on, or climb a mesa and, you know, or run on a mountain trail, or, you know, camp out under the stars. There are people who don't have the means to do that. And we have an obligation to future generations to give children opportunities to learn to love this earth and enjoy what it has to offer. I was very lucky. My dad was raised on a farm. He wanted to be outdoors every single minute of his life, and he made sure that we were. You know, he would take us on we'd spend a family vacation rowing in a rowboat in a swamp. You know what I'm saying? Like when we were kids, that was pretty, like, Dad, what the heck are you doing here? We didn't understand that all the way, but now when I think about being in Dismal Swamp in a rowboat with my dad and my siblings, it's a pretty amazing memory.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Deb. Let me, I think, you know, sometimes these Zoom calls are a little too antiseptic, so let's hear some voices from some other folks that have a question. Just raise your hand. I can see most of you on the screen. If I see you on the screen raising your hand for a question for Deb, I'll call on you. So raise your hand if you have a question for Congresswoman Haaland. I see Carlos Fernandez. Carlos from the Nature Conservancy, who does such great work. Carlos, what is your question?
I didn't have any question. I just have an appreciation for Deb Haaland and her very inspiring words. I was just actually sending also a message to Melissa Daruna, Keep It Colorado, saying this work is so important. And I think that, you know, I look forward to working across Colorado and the West on these issues with our land trust, you know, with many of our organizations. I feel that, you know, with the Nature Conservancy in Colorado, we are doing very initial steps on that and having a conversation with the Southern Youth Tribes in Southwest Colorado. But this is so much larger and so much richer. And I feel extremely humble to listen to these comments and very inspiring on the work ahead of us. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much, Carlos. I'm going to call on so Luis Benitez, who is the global head for VF Corp, Outdoor Recreation Industry, for a comment. And then I'm going to come back to President Joyce McConnell and ask her to make whatever closing comment she has to before Representative Haaland has to take off to vote. Since I see she is sitting in her office, and I saw C-SPAN behind her, and staff is coming and telling her she's going to miss a vote, and that's why she's there in Washington. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Representative Haaland, thank you so much for your work over the years. My question is centered mostly around the SOAR Act and your opinion of, are you seeing a lot of conversation right now about the outdoors being a component of economic recovery? Is the SOAR Act being viewed through that lens? Is the outdoors being viewed through that lens?
Yes, it actually is. And we've had a number of hearings over the past several years. You know, outdoor outfitters and people who make their living by enjoying, you know, our outdoors. Because we've done that in many different contexts, right? In context of that, you know, yes, this is an economic component of how we're going to recover type of thing. And also through the lens of folks who are saying climate change is going to have a negative impact on our businesses if we don't do something about it. So yes, we've had many witnesses come before our committee and testify about that very issue, and so it is a big one, and it's a bipartisan issue, right? I mean, Republicans live in some of the most beautiful states. You know, they represent some of the most incredibly beautiful states in our country. In fact, I just went this past. I had a little time off, and I went to Utah and went to Arches and to Canyonlands to hike, and so. They love their outdoors as much as anybody. And so I feel like so many of these issues that we're pushing forward, they have bipartisan support. And so we will keep bringing folks to the table to make that case. Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman.